Okay, so somehow my recording got cut off, so I'm going to do this in a second video. Here I went ahead and graphed all of these coordinates, and so now it says to rotate these counterclockwise. So remember, as you're graphing this figure, it should be closed, so make sure you close point G up to point A. So this point needs to connect. So you have a figure, it looks like an arrow. So I know that I'm going to rotate that down to here, and so I'm going to turn my paper 90 degrees counterclockwise. And so I see that if this was my first, second, third, and fourth quadrant, I can see in my third quadrant, this is where that figure is going to end up. So it's going to be pointing upward. You can actually count and see what the coordinates would be. So for A, if I just ignore the signs on this and imagine this to be my x-axis, I would come over 2 and down 6. So it would be -2, -6. And then my B would be -4, -6. Let's compare that. So we have, I said it would be -2, -6, and B I said would be -4, -6. So you can see that we have that pattern of them switching places, and our x coordinate becomes our y, and our y coordinate becomes the x, but it's the opposite. So remember, if you've memorized this, that's great, but you don't have to. They switch places. This becomes x, this becomes y. The x stays the same, but the y switches. So you can memorize that if you want, or you can just figure it out, plot the points, and then write your answers. So C prime should now be -4 and -4, and D prime should now be a -5 and a -4. This makes sense because everything down here is a negative. So if you just switch the x and y coordinates and then figured out their signs, that would make sense. So 3 and 3, they're both going to be negative. 1 and 4, they're both going to be negative. And 2 and 4, and they're both going to be negative. So we're going to go ahead and graph those and then come back and check and see how mine looks compared to yours. Okay, and so it should look like this. Again, just like what we expected the arrow to be pointing up. And then we have one last one, and this is a rotation 180 degrees. So let's graph this first figure. And I'm going to pause, go ahead and graph it, and then let's compare. Okay, so we have another arrow. So now this is going to rotate 180 degrees. Notice it doesn't tell you whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise, because it doesn't matter. If I go 90 degrees and then 90 degrees, it's going to end up here in this quadrant. If I go 90 degrees and another 90 degrees, it's going to end up in this quadrant. So remember, it's like a 90-degree turn and another 90-degree turn to get that one 180-degree turn. In this quadrant, we're going to have a positive for our x and a negative for our y. Now remember, when we switched from 190-degree turn, the x and y coordinates switched. So if we do 2 of them, switching them and then switching them again is going to keep them exactly the same. Notice I'm not putting any signs, I'm just copying down the coordinates. And now, since I know everything's going to end up in this fourth quadrant, I know that the first coordinate is positive and the second is negative. And so I can write those coordinates fairly quickly. And then I'm going to separate them with that comma. And then this would be F prime, U prime, N prime, M prime, A prime, T prime, and H prime. Now the rules for this, I don't have them memorized. There's so many things I have to memorize, but the rules for this is for every x and y, you're going to keep the x and keep the y in the same place, just like I had. Notice that I kept the numbers the same, absolute values the same, but what happens is the signs switch. So the x becomes whatever it was, negative. So since this was a -6, the opposite is positive. Notice all of these were negative, so the opposites are all positive. And the y also, we look at the opposite. Notice that all of these were positive, so they all become negative. So go ahead and graph that, and then we'll compare Okay, so here's what mine looks like. Make sure that you label these correctly. This was our pre-image over here. This is our image over here. So all the image vertices need to have that, looks like an apostrophe, and it's read as a prime. So F prime, U prime, N prime, M prime, A prime, T prime, and H prime. All right, that is it. And so enjoy doing